Hey, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We are starting in a couple minutes. We'll just give everyone some time to log in. It is 1 o'clock. Sorry, it's 2 o'clock Eastern or 11 o'clock if you're on the West Coast. Share this background. We'll just give it another 1 or 2 minutes for those of you who are just joining us. Want to make sure people have time to log in, and then we will get started.
No one's speaking right now. We're waiting to get started. I just saw a question here. So we're just giving it a few minutes for folks to log in. Hopefully you can hear us.
And we'll probably say this a few times, but the whole goal of this event is not just to inform, but also to answer your questions, because you can see some new ideas or some new approaches. We will leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A session. What we'd ask is to put your questions in the Q&A. So as we go through, what we'll do is if you're on slide 3 and you're like, I've got 2 questions there, just go ahead and put them in Q&A. And what happens, we'll finish, and then we're going to start working our way through your questions. I think we're up to about 24 attendees. I think maybe a few more seconds, Laura, and then we'll dive in.
Sounds great.
Let's start.
Sounds good.
So this presentation is, what is the best alternative to the H1-B visa? We're going to share a bunch with you. We'll have a bunch of options, see what works. In terms of the agenda, we'll do some introductions. We'll discuss what the problem is. We'll walk through US immigration options, walk through Canadian options, walk through how the Canadian option works, and then we'll have next steps in Q&A. Again, I'll repeat, there's plenty of time for Q&A. Anytime you have a question that you're thinking of, go ahead and put it in the Q&A, and at the end, we will cover all of them. So we'll get started.
Awesome.
Laura, over to you.
I'm Laura Blanears. I'm a U.S. immigration attorney. I work with the law firm WR Immigration, and I'm based in sunny Santa Monica. My clients are employers who sponsor foreign nationals. So if you're with a U.S. company and require any kind of visa sponsorship, I'm representing the company and the employee, the foreign national employee, so long as they're employed with that company. My clients range from Fortune 100 companies to startups in various industries. So I have a particular specialization in finance and technology, and I'm also getting into a number of pharma companies and medical device manufacturers. So that's the clients I'm sort of subspecializing in. And that within that breadth of companies, I represent various visa classifications from the L to the EB1, O1, H1B, so the alphabet soup of visas. I've seen them all based on the client profile. So, in the capacity of this conversation, we'll be talking a lot about how I'm advising the foreign national employees in light of H-1B registration results. So I do represent, like I said, the employee in the capacity that they're employed with the employer. So we do offer these kind of consultations and, next steps, and how can the company support continuing maintaining work authorization in the US post H-1B lottery results. So we'll dive into that more, but that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Laura. And I'll give a quick overview of me. Founder, CEO of Syndesis. Background is tech. Been in Silicon Valley for over 20 years. Worked for 7 VC-backed startups. I'm an American citizen, but I also lived in Canada 5 years, which gave me some perspective. I was up there on student visa for a master's, and then I got work visas. Worked in tech and venture capital up there. Founded Syndesis in 2014, and as we'll talk through, what we've learned being a Canadian employer of record is we also have permission to sponsor Canadian work visas, which is a unique solution. We'll dive into that more, but just a quick background on me of an American's perspective who's lived in Canada, understands their immigration system, and also understands the perspective of many of you who may have tech careers in the US and facing some challenges when the H-1B lottery did not go your way. What we'll do on the next slide here is we'll just pose the problem. And this is what we're thinking that could be a problem for anyone on this call. First and foremost, the toughest one is third try, unsuccessful attempt at the H-1B lottery, and you're thinking, now what? So it could be a OPT expiring. Also could be, there's also a use case where we've seen where people say, yeah, I did win the H-1B lottery. And then I have a massive multi-decade wait for a green card. And what could I do about that? And then last use case is we see sometimes where someone's like, my employer wants to employ me in the US. There is not an option to get a H-1B is not working out. How do I get into the US or close because I have a US job offer and I can't work remotely overseas. I can't be 13 hours time zones away. I need to be North America. What if? We can also cover that scenario. And in terms of US options, there are many. So Laura, over to you.
Yeah, so these are ones I've kind of put them into two buckets, the employer-sponsored options that may be available to you. So one that we often look to explore is the L1 visa, and this really only works if your company has offices outside of the US. And I'll add, not only do they have to have, affiliates, subsidiaries outside of the US, but their HR systems have to be set up where they can facilitate the transfer. So I'll put it in context. I deal with a number of varying sizes of clients, and some very large clients have integrated HR systems where they can facilitate a move and a transfer outside the US. Whereas other companies are set up where their HR is really insulated to the country. And so transferring someone to another country, to another affiliate, actually is really difficult, and that where the foreign national employee that wants to get to the affiliate outside the US often has to like apply for the job outside of the US and then go through a whole like interview process. So sometimes even if the company has affiliate offices outside the US, there may still be a lot of hoops and hurdles to jump through to even get that job outside the US, that there's not a direct like handoff, and that you might be working for a totally different team. So it kind of depends on the internal culture of the company, whether they're willing to facilitate it, whether they practically can facilitate it. And then the second is if they're willing to pay to facilitate it. So it kind of depends on a number of things. And the L visa does require some lead time. So again, if you're going to go to another country like the UK, that process might take some time. So you'll want to be having these conversations with your employer early on. Reach out to your manager if this is a possibility that in light of the H-1B lottery, you want to go abroad and then apply for the L1 visa back into the US. There's a lot of tricky conversations you have to line up about whether that's feasible, costs associated with that as well. One that I really like using is the extraordinary ability. This is, we use an O1 visa. The EB1 is the green card, the green card option. The O1 visa is also known as the Einstein visa, and this is a great one, especially if you have a master's or a PhD, maybe you have some publications, but essentially we have to prove to the government that you have extraordinary ability within your field of expertise. It can be used in business, it can be used in science, tech. We've also done a number of artists out here. I'm in Santa Monica, we're out in LA. We've done a number of musicians, producers, movie stars. But that's all to say that you have to show at least 3 of the qualifying criteria to meet this category for the O1. Additionally, for the EB1, that is the category for green card. The criteria are the same. The bar is just higher for the green card. The scrutiny is just ramped up a little bit for the green card. But the O1 is a good one in that you don't have to transfer abroad, and it's based a lot on your background. So some things you can think about are, have you won any awards? Not just school awards, but have you published any patents? Have you served as a member or a judge that you've been nominated within the field? Things like that. So you can reach out and I can shoot you a worksheet if you're interested to sort of understand more concretely what those criteria look like. But rest assured that not everybody qualifies for it. Although we are in the golden age of extraordinary ability, we're seeing the government be more flexible in this category. So this is something definitely worthwhile exploring. It does take a few months to prepare these applications. So if your STEM OPT EAD expires in May, the timeline's just not going to work out for you. You need a few months. So you need to start having these conversations with your US immigration attorney, pronto. The next 2 categories, the treaty-based visa and the E2 visa, these are based on like your nationality, your citizenship. Most folks already know if they qualify for something like a TN, if you're from Canada or Mexico, and you fall within the discrete list of occupations, or if you're a citizen of Singapore, Chile, or Australia. You have these treaty-based visas that function just like the H1-B. And so most folks already know that they might qualify for this. So this is kind of an obvious one, but worth mentioning as is a screening tool here. The E2 visa, again, is going to be pretty obvious. Your company's going to know whether they qualify for the E2. Essentially, the company must fall under a specific nationality, meaning it's either majority owned by a qualifying citizen, or it's traded on the market of the publicly traded in that country. So an example here is a German auto parts manufacturer that's traded on the German exchange can sponsor a German national, a German citizen for this E2 visa. So it's based on the company's nationality and the employee's nationality. Again, most folks in this scenario, your company's immigration attorney is going to know that you qualify for this because it's something that they regularly bring folks in under. The other bucket here is the options to explore outside of your employer. So these are where you're taking it into your own hands, where you don't require employment sponsorship. The first one is, and I'm sure most of you have heard of this on the call, is to maintain your F1 status, meaning you enroll in a new academic program. Now that might mean you have day 1 CPT if you enroll in those types of programs, and buyer beware. Or you might go from, completing your bachelor's, you might enroll in a master's degree. If you move up into, going from the bachelor's to the master's, you're not going to get that necessarily day 1 CPT. Not many programs offer the day 1 work authorization, but after completing the degree, you can get another round of OPT and STEM EAD. I just want to note you can't get that 3 times though. So if you've completed a bachelor's in the US and have completed an OPT STEM, you only get 1 more round of that after completing a master's. You can't then get it after a PhD. So you only get 2 grants of those 3 years post academic work authorization. The other thing you can do is find a CAP exempt employer. So this is something that I know not many folks explore. It would be difficult, but if you work for a university, for example, and that could be in a part-time capacity, you can then also file another H1B and work full-time for a non-exempt H-1B employer. So this is a little bit of a workaround. You'll want to be on the same page with your both employers of what you're doing, because they, kind of work in concert. I've had clients that, have affiliations with universities. And so sometimes there's some really interesting like incubator programs that they can work with, things like that. So something to explore, or you could go full-time work for a university cap exempt employer and pursue the H-1B through that route. Again, if you're going a cap exempt employer, if you ever wanted to move to a cap subject employer, you would have to be reseated in the lottery. So just something that you can the only way you can exist in both worlds is if you are maintaining a concurrent employment. So a little bit tricky, but pop in questions if you've got some on that. And then the last one is if you have a spouse in a status that permits a dependent work authorization, this is something you can pursue an EAD. Just letting you all know, the EADs are currently taking about 5 months. So if this is something you have the opportunity to apply for, you do need some lead time to apply for that EAD to ensure you don't have any work authorization gaps. So again, if you have a spouse in this situation, you probably already know, but you can also screen for that and then work with an immigration attorney to help you secure that dependent EAD or work authorization.
Cool.
That's my
Thanks, Laura.
spiel, Mark.
That's a lot of options. So I know some of you may be listening and saying, wait, I got a bunch of questions on L1. Do I qualify? Please put them in Q&A. What we're going to do is we're going to go through the slides, and at the end, then we're going to tick through each of your questions. So just along the way, something comes up, put it in Q&A. We promise we'll get to your questions. These are a lot of good options. And one of the reasons for this presentation is the first swing anyone's going to do, an immigrant to the US, is how do I stay? And Laura's walked through some great options. And then some of you on the call are going to be like, and I tried all of those. And
Right.
like I've gone to I was aware of these options and we tried. And then what? What are the other options? So now we're going to propose another solution, which most people don't know of, is what if you just look north, got a Canadian work permit, work from Canada? So this is another option. This is basically saying I couldn't make US immigration work. What about our friends up north? So what we say for what this option allows you to do, it's your same US job, it's your same US laptop, you report to the same boss, you probably stay in the same time zone. What you're basically doing is if you get this Canadian work visa, and if your company agrees to work with Syndisa to walk through how that works, we do this every year by the dozens. You just basically move from San Francisco to Vancouver, Dallas to Calgary. You can pick where you want to work in Canada, but most people try and line up with their US company and they continue working. They leave the US immigration system, they move into the Canadian immigration system. So if you're like, how could that possibly work? So one of the most important parts to emphasize is you have a current job. So if you, the unfortunate part, if you're on this call and you're like, I got laid off, I'd like a tech job, I couldn't get an H1, or I couldn't get into the US, or I'm trying to get a job. For both the scenarios that Laura walked through and that I'm walking through, this is, you're in the US system, you have a job, but you lost the lottery the final try. And now you're facing expiring OPT and you're like, what do I do now? I do not want to just lose my job and lose my American dream, lose everything. So the first step for either of us to help you is you're currently employed by a US or global company. Next step is to qualify for the Canadian work visa. It says tech job. And some of you are like, wait, I'm a machine learning engineer. Wait a minute, I'm a data scientist. Hold on, I'm a product manager. I'm a QA analyst. That the Canadian immigration system, when they define the term tech job, the goal of the work visa is called Global Talent Stream. The goal of the program is to bring 200,000 skilled immigrants into Canada. So Canada basically looks and says, tech job could be full stack engineer. It's basically any technical role. It could be software, could be hardware, could be mechanical engineer, could be someone who's a statistician for a biopharmaceutical company. There are a lot of tech roles, STEM roles, and then there's a whole separate section is, are you the manager? So for example, you get engineering leaders, CTOs, VP of product. Canadian immigration looked at this and says, it's not just the smart people we want to bring into the country, the STEM workers, a manager would qualify too, because that person's a leader. So it says tech job, it's very open. And we'll talk about how to qualify in a little more depth. The third question is a US company wants to keep you. And that's also, it sounds a bit ridiculous, but it's critical. So this is where you're usually in a room. It could be with a Canadian, an American immigration lawyer like Laura, you're with a US boss, and the three of you are sitting down. It's like, and at some point the acknowledgement's made, there are no more US immigration options. Usually the US
Right.
company's like, we've tried. And but the emphasis is we want to keep you. So in that case, they're like, what other options are there? And then out of the blue, here's this Canadian option. The next step is your job has to be 100% remote. So we've moved people to Canada who basically their conversation was, look, I was working in California for a Texas company. Doesn't matter. I was in California. I'm in Vancouver. What's the difference? That's the best scenario. Your job's remote. Your company accepts that you're remote. It's no problem for you being remote. Where it doesn't work, sometimes we'll have someone say, no, I'm working for a pharmaceutical. I'm in the lab. I've got to be doing experiments. That doesn't work. We have seen hardware engineers. I know we've moved a couple robotics engineers where the company said, Mark, don't worry. There are some pieces of hardware. We're going to send that to Canada. The worker actually can work on this remotely. We'll send them what they need. They don't have to be in a lab. What they're working on, the hardware actually is shippable. I'm like, that works, but you have to be remote. And there's also the no travel piece. People have come to us and said, hey, I'm on the road all the time. I'm traveling to different US sites. I'm actually have to be on site. That won't work. This is basically, it's you're going to Canada. We do hear people come down every quarter. I was in Vancouver several months back meeting some people we moved, and a couple of them were like, oh yeah, I'm doing like, I do quarterly meetings down in Silicon Valley. I fly down to the US. Some of them, talked about personal relationships. They were still flying down. I'm like, okay, there's a limited amount of travel, but you can't be coming back every month and you can't be coming back to work. Next, your US company is a smaller mid-sized employer. And so what basically happens is all the big companies, we see people come in, Caterpillar, Ford, Google, any large HP, any of the biggest companies. And what we always tell them is, if you're working with a big company, your company would have already had a conversation with Laura or another experienced US immigration lawyer. They would have figured out if and how they would move you. In this case, if you're working for that company, you need to go back and talk with your team and find out if you can be moved. Where this works is the smaller mid-sized company that doesn't have a Canadian corporation in place. So basically we're giving you and your employer the ability to do is mimic what the big players have been doing. Facebook, Google, Microsoft, they figured all Canadian immigration out 10, 20, 30 years ago. They've been moving people up there. It's the startups, the scale-ups, the VC-backed companies, the ones who don't have an operation in Canada aren't usually aware of this. We're giving you the opportunity to say you can do exactly what they do, because the reality behind that is Syndesis is a Canadian corporation. We're a Canadian employer of record. We employ Canadians in Canada who work remotely for US companies, and we sponsor work visas. So we move someone up, we legally employ you in Canada. If your company doesn't have an operation up there, this is a great solution. And then lastly, this sometimes is the toughest one. We'll have the worker saying, this is amazing. I want this. All of this works out well for me. Canadian work visa sounds easy to get. The Canadian permanent resident sounds like it's easy to get. Let's go. That's great. We're happy to help, but we need a contract signed by your US company. Just like Laura will work with your US company on US immigration. For this option, we have to have your US employer on the phone. They're the one that's going to take care of the cost and the billing and everything. There are I shouldn't say to our surprise, but maybe to the surprise of the immigrant tech worker, when the Syndesis team is having a conversation with the company, it's the company saying, this worker is critical to us. We've done everything we could to keep them in the US. The US immigration has let us down. We want to keep this worker. So when they hear this option from Syndesis, they're happy because to put it bluntly, the economic calculation your company is doing we've learned this from talking to dozens of HR execs, VP of people. They're looking at this saying, we're going to lose someone talented. All your experience that you've learned, that you have with this company is going to walk out the door, because most cases, if people return to home country, if it's Pakistan, India, China, it results in the worker being terminated. And your company does not want that. They're trying to keep you. And if that piece is in place, it is easy to negotiate with them, because we're basically telling them, here's an option you haven't heard of. it's fast, it's a fraction of the cost of replacing the worker. Your US company is faced with an extremely expensive option of hiring someone else. They won't know everything you know. They weren't part of the team like all of you were. They didn't learn everything you did. They didn't contribute everything they did. The US company starting over. So when they talk with us, we're on the call, we explain how simple this is. Almost every time you have a US employer nodding saying, this sounds like the best solution. It's fast and easy. Let's go for it. And
Yeah, I had a
sorry, go
recent
ahead.
yeah, I had a recent conversation with the Syndesis team. I introduced a client of mine that was interested because when we walk through all the options and then tick them off and say that the employee doesn't qualify for them, this is the next solution. And so as someone who's supporting the company, I'm, I want the solution. I was talking to Mark before this, like I don't want to just say, no, there's no more options. You have to, you have to let this employee go. Because, my firm does some benchmarking and we found that 83% of the respondents, and these are company respondents, tenured mobility leaders, 83% want to retain the talent if that's a high performing individual. So there's definitely an appetite, an overwhelming appetite for companies to retain the talent. I'm just not sure all of the companies know about this option. The companies that we surveyed, some of them do have affiliate offices, but some of them don't. And so knowing that you can introduce this option that maybe they didn't know about, it was very well received. So, if you need help sort of navigating that, make sure you've got some advocates in the room, like your manager, to approach the HR or the additional stakeholders that would help facilitate that within the company.
Thanks for sharing that, Laura, because you said what we always hear. Most HR execs, management has not heard of this option. So once in a while, we'll get a referral in from a US immigration lawyer saying, we went through all the options. Syndesis is the plan B. That we've done everything for the US options. Now let's look for a close by option. And what we usually find is it is the people on this call. It's not the majority of these people who probably signed up for this call. It's you on the line. You are the immigrant tech worker. You are the one that came to the US with dreams. You're the ones that went to university here. You did everything right. And then you got let down by US immigration. We're trying to give you another option here. And it's one that your employer, what we find is 99% of the time, they have no idea. And they usually sit on the call with a level of shock saying, no one ever told us. And that's why we have this webinar to share this option. Just before we take questions, again, if you're looking at this saying, okay, I got questions, please put them into Q&A. We'll walk through all of those at the end in a few minutes here. What I'll do is one last slide before we do the Q&A. And I apologize if the font is a bit on the small side. I'll walk through it. If you go left to right, this is basically a time continuum. So what the first thing to do is, if you've exhausted US options, schedule a call with the Syndesis team. We'll show you how on the next slide. You have a consultation call. Then what usually happens on that call, it's usually the US company will say, okay, this sounds great. Let's have that quick consultation call with the Canadian immigration lawyer. This person says they're going to qualify. Let's make sure. And so you have a quick consultation with the Canadian immigration lawyer, 48 hours, quick turnaround. I've been surprised sometimes. There's times where I'm like, I don't think this person qualifies. And then I'll send them forward anyway, or my team will send them forward. And the Canadian lawyers we work with, we've been working with them for over half a decade. They'll come back and they'll be like, okay, Mark, I know you're a little doubtful the person wasn't in a tech role, but they have a tech degree and they're a business analyst. And actually, when we had a conversation with the worker, the business analyst focus was still tech focus. We talked about their work. They qualify. It's all good. So what I've learned, and my team has learned, never to say no. The only people we know who won't qualify, if you're like, look, I have an MBA, a business degree, and I'm in marketing, or I'm a sales rep, then it's not going to work. But if there's a possibility because of a past tech degree, we say do the consultation. Then there's some paperwork with Syndesis, takes a couple of weeks to put in place. Then there's two steps. Step one is global talent stream application. I've seen this now for 6 years. From when you put the application in until you get the first approval, it is 1 to 2 weeks like clockwork. It comes back approved. The only time they're not approving this is if there's a criminal record or a background check brings up that there's a medical issue, but usually people disclose that. Those are the only exceptions. Then it goes to the work permit application process, work visa application, 6 to 8 weeks, comes back approved. That's where you're applying if it's yourself, spouse, family. That comes back. So we see the whole process taking 8 weeks, 10 weeks, took longer during COVID. Now we're back to a 2 to 2.5 months. You see a worker we'll hear like, oh, my work permit's approved. And we're like, time to move to Canada. So you're basically dealing with over 99% approval. I say you move to Canada 1 to 2 weeks. What we always advise is, look, don't sell your house or don't give the 30 days notice right away. But we say 1 to 2 weeks because some people are like, okay, well, I got this, and they're like, time to go. And so people have been packing up, preparing. What Syndesis does during that 6 to 8 weeks while you're waiting for the work visa, we have a global mobility service we offer free to the workers. Basically, it's a monthly webinar. We're like, here's how you set up banking in Canada, the big banks of immigrant banking. Here's what we suggest for mobile phones. Here's all the players. Here's what we suggest you do in terms of getting an apartment, getting a house. Here's connection to realtors. We basically give you a guide of how to move to Canada. So you're kind of like you're preparing before you go. And then work visa comes through and people are like, I'm ready to go. I already know how to move. I've already located an Airbnb. I'm set up with that one. And then you quickly transition up north. Some people drive, some fly, depends if you have anything to move. And then the last box basically is you start your job. It's as simple as we've had people show up, fly in over a weekend. On Monday, we're like, there's 2 things you will do. On your first day in Canada, you're going to go to an office and get a Canadian social insurance number. It's like an American social security card. They give you a temporary number. You take that number, you walk with that number. The next stop is you go to the bank, you drop your passport on the table, that number, and then your work permit. And you're like, want to open an account? You open an account, and then reach out to the Syndesis team, and you're like, here's my social insurance number. Here's where my bank is. And we're like, you can start the next day. So people quickly, there's almost no downtime loss. Then they're just like, the only thing difference is people look at your backdrop and they're like, oh, it looks like a Vancouver skyline behind you. And someone's like, yeah, I just moved. And you're right back with your team online as you always were. That was the last slide. What we want to do is we see a few questions, Q&A. So what we're going to pop up here is next steps. If any of you are listening to this and you're like, wait a minute, I've got more questions on this. Laura shared some options I didn't know. We're going to go back. We want to have a conversation about the American options. Laura's email's there. You can reach out to her. She can schedule a call. If you're like, we have no more options. We went through all those. What's this Canada option? Connect at syndesis.com. The Syndesis team will schedule a call with you. We'll walk through and answer your questions and see if this option works for you. We have a bunch of questions here. So I think let's start with the first one. It says, can you provide a list of immigration-friendly countries as of now, or which accept U.S. work experience? I think the solution we're trying to do here is you're in the U.S. and you ran out of U.S. options. So the easiest option worth coming up with is move you to Canada. In that case, your U.S., whatever experience you have transfers, there'd be no issues. The next one I would say is over. Can you tell me about the EB-1A? Laura, that would be your world. Over to you.
Yeah, so the EB-1A, that's it's the EB-1, so the first preference-based category for a green card. This does not require a employer sponsorship. And again, this is for the green card. It requires that you meet at least 3 of the qualifying criteria. And so you can go online, or I can send you the qualifying criteria. If you ping me, I'll send you an assessment sheet. But basically it's like, have you received a national or international recognized prize or award? So again, this can't be university. This has got to be like, Chemical Engineers of America, gave you an award. Proof of membership in organizations that require outstanding achievement. So again, that it's not just like you're a member because you paid a fee to get in. It's you've been nominated based on your background. You've published materials in major media, that you've participated on a panel or judged the work of others. you have original scientific, scholarly, or business-related contributions of major significance. So often if you have publications, you're usually publishing something about the novel work that you're doing. This really goes into like the science world, but I've also seen it from business that, you've created a new product line. I've done this for product managers. This is a little bit harder and it requires a ton of documentation. But there's really creative ways you can do this, but rest assured you have to show receipts on stuff. So you can't just say like, oh, I'm really important at my company. You may be, but that's just not what this the qualifying criteria. The other are that you've been employed in a critical or essential capacity. A lot of my foreign national employee clients want to pursue this. This is, you got to have a leadership role. Like we're talking like CTO, we're talking like leading some sort of organizational effort with really high visibility in publications. So again, you might be very important to your team, but that's not like critical capacity. And that the last one is evidence of high commanded salary. This one is not the strongest criteria. So a lot of folks in Silicon Valley will qualify for this in the sense that like, hey, you're paid very well among like peers within the US. But we're really, that one's not going to win the day. You have to have a number of other criteria to really make it work. So those are sort of high level. It's really you got to be recognized outside of your company in a really meaningful way within your field. So hopefully that covers it.
Thanks, Laura. And the next one, I think I'll have you swing at first, and then I can
Okay.
offer one angle. But it's they're asking when I'm interviewing with a company, can I suggest another visa sponsorship besides H1B? Finishing PhD in data science, 5 years of work experience. I will have OPT after I graduate. Is O1 feasible for companies? Or is there anything else that's suggested?
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation to start. So once you onboard with your OPT, I think understanding and identifying um, who the right person in your organization like leads up the mobility or immigration function, and have a meeting with them and your manager and say like, I'd really like to be proactive in this. Can I get a screening, a consultation with our immigration attorneys? Because the O1, like I mentioned, takes a number of months to prepare. So having that conversation early on, especially someone with a PhD and 5 years of work experience, without knowing more about your background, like you potentially have a viable case, and the attorney could say at the onset, hey, here's some things that you're missing and you can work on in your OPT year, and then tee up a nice O1, the following year. So never too soon. Identify the right people to start having that conversation that can advocate for you, and then go for that screening assessment with the Immigration Council.
Thanks, Lauren. That is the best way because it covers, you're going to want to cover your US immigration options. The only way a Canada option would apply here is there's two. Say, for example, you're interviewing with a US company and they're just like, H1B, I'm sorry, no. Like if
Yeah.
they were to be burned out, or they're like, and you're like, it's my dream company, and they're like, yes, but we're not sponsoring. And if you push a little farther and be like, well, you're not sponsoring, they might say, look, it's been tough in previous years. Then there's an odd case where you're like, no, I really want to work for that company. Then the other angle is, look, do you employ people remotely? I'm a data scientist. Do I not have to be on premise here? What if I can give you a guaranteed work visa? What if I give you an option in Canada where it's guaranteed this work visa will happen and I will be working with your company? And hey, this is in Boston. I'm just across the border in Montreal or in Toronto. That might be possible. Again, your best options are talk to Laura, find out what the US immigration options are. Or the other thing to keep in mind is you're like, okay, I'm going to take my US option. I'm going to get OPT. I'm going to go for the H1B lottery, but I know that in 3 years, if it doesn't work out, I've got a Canada option. You take the US swing first. Canada's waiting for you down the road if things don't work out. Next question is, I'm a US citizen working in a tech company. I have a startup which has 2 contracted employees. Can I hire international individuals who need a visa? So I think this one's over to you, Laura. I think this is like, can I sponsor Am I hiring people
Yeah, I
from?
mean, so the answer is potentially if they qualify for a visa classification. So if the foreign nationals have the OPT, yep, you onboard them, no problem. It's an open work permit. As we're talking about, it gets trickier once they burn through the OPT cycle. You'd have to sponsor them for H-1B. Interesting question as the employer side, the main thing as the startup that some of my startup companies struggle with is you have to show ability to pay the wage for the H-1B. So there's a lot of wage and hour liability and consideration to file. So this will require some disclosures on how you pay, and we can be really creative in how you do that. Most of my startup companies don't want to show like all their investor information or how they're being funded because they don't want that to be public, but you have to have some sort of other way to show you can pay this tech worker the wages you're promising and that are sort of minimally required for the H-1B. So the answer is yes, as long as you're confident that you can show, in the bank you've got enough to make payroll for them. And then also assuming that they can win the H-1B lottery or they qualify for some other category.
Thanks, Laura. Move on to the next question, also for you from Mubaris. For L1, do you have to be a manager?
No, so the L1, there's two categories. There's one where to qualify the L1, you have to have served in a managerial role at the affiliate abroad and then are being offered a managerial position in the US. There's also the L1 classification for specialized knowledge. So this one means that you hold some sort of proprietary knowledge for the company that you've gained from working at their affiliate abroad and that we will continue to work in that sort of proprietary product, or you're so specialized, meaning you have such an advanced degree or such knowledge within the field of which you're working, and that's why it's so important that you come here. So no, you don't, but you have to qualify under that specialized knowledge argument.
Thanks. I think this next one also is for you. A question is for a friend. He's on H1. If he applies NIW, I'm not sure what that stands for. He's considered parole and has legal status, correct?
No, the NIW, the National Interest Waiver, that is filed on the I-140 immigrant petition. And that does not, the filing or the approval of an I-140 does not grant any type of status in the US. Many Indian nationals will know that they have a approved I-140 with a priority date that has them waiting for 10, 12, 15, 20 years before receiving a green card. So it offers no status in the US. You have to maintain some sort of underlying work authorization like an H-1B, an L1, OPT, some sort of work authorization. Once you file the form I-485 or the adjustment of status, that is when you're granted the permission to stay in the US. But filing the I-140 does not grant you anything. And the approval of an I-140 doesn't grant you any status in the US.
Okay. Another question for you. EB1A is more favor given to people of big companies, university names in their profile.
No, not in and of itself. But that being said, folks with really strong backgrounds and profiles often end up going to big companies and universities to command higher salaries. So sometimes that is what we see, but that it doesn't is not a requirement for that visa classification.
And I have there's one question the person asked previously is, can I get a recording? Yes, we will send a recording out to everyone who is attended. And also just let everyone know if anyone's still on here, if you're like, my question hasn't been answered, or I've got a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A. One question from Hamed asking, how long does it take to be approved from H1B or from who stays abroad? And then not going to get in touch more questions. I should move the Q&A over to not block questions, or I would say you'd email either of us, either Connect or Laura here, but over to you for the O1 question.
Yeah, so how long does it take to be approved? I mean, I think generally we're saying like it takes our team about like 3 months to file an O1, and that means you're getting reference letters to us timely and things like that. The O1 can be premium processed. So if you pay the additional filing fee of $2,805 these days, then the US government will adjudicate the petition in 15 calendar days. So I think plan on like 4 to 5 months. if you then have to go get a visa abroad, that's going to add some time depending on what consulate you're coming through. So it's a pretty lengthy process. So I don't, anyone that's promising you a very quick turnaround, you want to believe it. It's just really tough to do a quality petition like in '01 that quickly.
Thanks. And the next question here is they have a question regarding treaty-based visa. First one is Canadian citizen in Canada. What are the perspective on best approaches for them to move the US to US in tech? Follow-up is TN visa is non-immigrant work visa. What's the process of getting through the green card process? And third is if a sibling was US citizen, where they started application for sponsorship and green card, does it make it hard to get TN? All good
Yeah,
questions.
so high level, the TN is the fastest uh like non-immigrant visa for a Canadian national who qualifies under the occupations list. So a tech worker under a TN is usually falling under engineer. So computer science engineer, a data science engineer can all be kind of coded under that engineering category as long as they have a related computer science or engineering degree. There's also, I think there's a computer systems analyst occupation as well. So you have to sort of fit based on your degree and what the job that's being offered. High level, you can move from a TN to a green card, but there are a lot of travel restrictions in place. If you have an immigrant petition already on file with the government, applying for a TN is going to be difficult. So you're going to need to talk to a U.S. immigration attorney to have your case screened further before moving forward with a TN. Or if you're engaging with a company to move forward with a TN, make sure you're disclosing everything that's ever been filed on your behalf to make sure that they're screening you appropriately to make sure you still have a viable petition.
And I'll answer that, Laura. I'm going to go to a different tangent on that. That they brought up an interesting angle. Is it's what I assumed is a Canadian citizen asking about a TN.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the people having moved 100 plus people to Canada. There's and this is always a tough one. Like for me as a U.S. citizen, because I can say lived in Canada, it's great. I've been living there 5 years. I can vouch for it. But I understand when someone says, okay, Mark, I hear you. I saw the work visa seems easy. Permanent residence happens in 12 to 24 months. Citizenship in 4. That all sounds great. But the coolest tech jobs are in Silicon Valley, where you used to work, and in the US. And so there's a strategy we throw out there, speaking of TNs, and we call the boomerang strategy, which is, okay, look, if you can't stay in the US and you have no choice, use this option. It's indeed moves you to Canada, you keep your US job. 12 to 18 months, you get permanent residence. In about 4 years after you arrive, you're holding a Canadian passport. You're a Canadian citizen. Now, you want to come back to the US, you're holding, it's just as Laura said, you come back as a Canadian citizen, you're like, I want to work in the US, right back to Silicon Valley, New York, Austin, Boston. You can come back as a Canadian citizen. You can be in how long have you seen people renew TNs in the US?
Yeah, I mean, and definitely, and in fact, I've seen a number of clients these days that have that profile, that have obtained, that's an Indian national with a U.S. degree, or even maybe they go and get their master's degree in Canada, and pursue the PR citizenship through the education and sort of work permit that way, and then come back in under the TN. So that's actually a very common like profile I'm seeing these days, and that it is very straightforward to get the TN visa. You can continue to renew the TN, and again, with the right strategy, you can move from green card. So I know some blogs out there say if you're on a TN, you can't get a green card. That's absolutely not true, but it has to be sort of a narrowly developed strategy. There's going to be travel restrictions and things like that. So you're definitely going to need to be working with counsel to pursue the green card on the TN, but it's absolutely possible.
I want to throw that up because I thought it was a
Yeah.
Canadian asking, and I'm like, I understand. There's some people are like, no, that American dream never stopped, and we always say, then if you have to, be holding that Canadian passport, it'll never get taken away, but there is a way to come back. So I know we're
Yeah,
down to
good
our
point.
last 11 minutes. Another question for you: how can we transition from cap exempt to cap subject H1B? Do we have to enter the H1B lottery for that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you can immediately move to a cap exempt employer like a university, and then to move to a cap subject employer, that cap subject employer would need to have applied for a lottery registration, and you would need to be selected to move to that new employer. So that's just how it works. You just have to go through the lottery.
All right. The next one also for you, Laura. It's, can I self-present for O1, or does my employer need to be on it, or can I hire a lawyer and do it and the employer sign the paperwork?
So the O1 does require an employer to sponsor you. The employer, there's no requirement that the employer pay any of the legal fees. So um, this gets a little bit complicated because I've had foreign national employees ask for, their employer to just sign off on a petition that they didn't like authorize. So you'll want to be really careful about how you do that. I think often when this is handled, it's usually that the employer says, yeah, that's fine. If you qualify for the O1, we're happy to sign off on it, but you have to use our attorney because we're comfortable like with working with them. And then you pay their attorney the fees. That's where I've seen the employers be the most open to it. That doesn't mean they won't go with your personally hired lawyer. It just because the company's engaging has an attorney relationship with that lawyer, they don't like being forced to engage with the lawyer that they didn't screen. And often in corporate America, there's all these like, protocols that they have to go through to even use an outside vendor like that. So just be careful how you navigate it, but it's definitely something you could pursue.
Thanks. And another question for you of any idea of priority date movement? India, do you have any some more info because of such slow progress?
We have a whole podcast on this. So YouTube Chatting with Charlie, WR does monthly webinars or podcasts about this. So tune into that and you'll get a much better much better insights from the guy that ran the visa office for immigrant visas for like over 20 years. So I'll defer you to that platform.
Cool. The next one I'll take from Dorina is Canadian option only for tech people. Lawyer, I'm a lawyer focused on banking, finance transactions, international arbitration. What are the possibilities for me to qualify for a Canadian option? Um, Canada has something similar to an O1. So if that case you're like, come on, I'm not a coder. Could I possibly qualify? In this case, I would say reach out to connectedsandvisas.com, have one of my team members set up a call with a Canadian immigration lawyer. You'll spell out your case, and there may be an option. It may go back to a similar Canadian version to what Laura's talking about, like of publications. What have you accomplished? There may be a way. So I would defer and say, let a Canadian immigration lawyer give you the exact answer, what's possible. Is the Canadian remote work option limited, restricted for any particular nationalities like Indians? Um, Canada's immigration, work visa programs and immigration are based on merit and qualifications. There is no place on any of Canadian applications where they say, okay, wait, because if you're from Taiwan, you're from China, you're from Pakistan, there are no differences. There are a couple treaties in place, but there are no limitations. So I've a question that will always get asked is, okay, Mark, I'm in a long green card line. What's the green card line in Canada? Just tell me how long it is, and I can compare my notes. And so we always share is the work visa is not done in a lottery. Global talent stream work visa we deal with is done on merit, and what's going to disqualify you is a medical condition or illegal activity, or you broke the law. You don't do those two things, you are going to get the work visa. There's no lottery. Canada's trying to get 200,000 people in. I think they're even short of 100,000 now. The program is considered successful, but they want more people. So there's no limitation there. Then when it comes to permanent residence, the Canadian green card, it is not by national origin. It is about points, and it is about time. So we've had people tell us, well, I'm trying to get on express entry. The draw numbers are getting higher and higher. I've been waiting for years. And we always tell people that's one way in. That's the way in if you don't have a job. If you you got bad news from the H-1B lottery this year. You can't stay in the US. If you came to Syndesis, we were able to move you to Canada, get a work permit. With that work permit, the moment you show up in Canada, 50 points is tacked onto your application for express entry for permanent residence. Each year of work experience in Canada, you get more points. The majority of people we've moved, I think all of them, in 2 years, 24 months, got Canadian PR. Some of them said, Mark, I'm a bit older. I'm in my 30s, I'm in my 40s. They may have taken longer, but every year of Canadian work experience just moved them to the place where they were able to get in. So there are no limitations on nationality. Um, this question from Dorina is over to you, Laura. Dorina is asking to file EB1A and EB1, EB2 NIW concurrently.
Yeah, so you could, as far as the reason to do that, I think that's you maybe not want to do that, but you'd want to consider the strategy. But is it technically allowed? Yes.
And I know we're down to our last 5 minutes here, so I have a few questions left. From Safez, I think this is a question targeted at Canada. My employer may not be open to new options, and I do have open work permit. What are the options working towards PR mid 40s? I think if that's an option in Canada, and again, I'm not a Canadian immigration lawyer, so I would again say we definitely want to get you a consultation if needed. Canadian system does work against you when you age-wise. It is a points-based system. What we have seen though is the idea basically is if you're trying to get express entry, the scores are high and people are waiting longer and longer. What we see is if you can move your job into Canada or you get the work permit, again, 50 points up front and then points every single year. We're seeing people even who are like thinking, hey, I was facing a long wait. If you're in and then you get the work experience, it speeds you up. But I would recommend, again, I don't want to give immigration advice in that if you're like, what is my exact scenario? I would say reach out to Connect at Syndesis. We'll connect you to a Canadian immigration lawyer. You can talk to a professional and then you can make sure that you get exactly the best advice. This one is over to you, Laura. That's a Canadian. Can I sponsor my own TN or do I need an employer to do so? Can I go beyond 3 years of extensions?
You do need an employer sponsor. This is not a self-sponsored category. You can't be an independent contract. You have to be employed with a company. And yeah, so your first grant of TN status is in 3 years, and then it's renewable in 3-year increments for indefinitely. You can continue to renew it forever, as long as you're employed.
And then this last few questions here. Can a tech job on the product team on H4 EAD be transferred to Canada? I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, but there's no tie between the systems, US immigration system, Canadian, completely independent. So
Correct.
in this case, so there's something unique about the Canadian work visa, since you asked about H4. Every Canadian work visa, there's qualifications like it's a tech job, and there's a few other qualifications for global talent stream. But the Canadian work visa, even though it's would be considered closed, you're going to work in this specific job, Syndesis is sponsoring you. Every Canadian work visa comes with an open work visa for spouse or partner. So basically, it's a bit there's some people in the US who might be challenged, like, look, H4 was difficult. I couldn't work in the US. One of us could work, one couldn't. Canada, basically, their approach is like, well, both people should be working. We need more, we need more skilled immigrants. So they make sure that every work visa, if you have a family members obviously get theirs. If you have children, but your partner gets an open work visa, they can work for any Canadian company, no sponsorship needed. And then a question for you, Laura, do you charge for initial consultation? Talk about EB1A and how likely to get it.
Yeah, so my initial consult fee will be $500. And then if we decide to engage further, we would set up another engagement agreement.
Thanks. And we're down to about 1 or 2 minutes to see how we get through these real quick. This one for you, I will 40 approved. Other options you have to stay in the US without working for an employer, open a business once I get it approved through my current employer.
Yeah, there's not a current clear-cut visa path for entrepreneurs. So there are some like special circumstances, open EAD. Practically, I've not seen many people obtain it. So that's something I get a lot of questions about, but it's just not something we're seeing approvals for. So great to lock in an I-140 approval notice and that you've got your priority date, but as we're sort of talking about, and Mark's alluding to, like a lot of folks will end up wanting to go to Canada just because depending on if you were born in India or China, your line for obtaining the green card in the US is quite long. I'll plug the chatting with Charlie again if you want a better sense of like how the lines are moving and kind of reading the tea leaves there. Charlie Oppenheim, again, ran the immigrant visa office for Department of State for 20 years, and he is the only one that knows how this works and how it moves. So check us out on YouTube, and you can find out more about the movements there. But yeah, you can't really self-sponsor as a business owner, which is shocking in the US.
Yeah, I think, Laura, we're right at time. Do you have 1 or 2 minutes, or do you have to?
Sure, sure. Yeah,
Let's see if
let's
we can
knock these
speed through
out.
some of these. For the
Yeah.
ones who have H1B work visa and the spouse applies for H4. So what does the H4 visa ones have authorization work in the US? What's the process, and when can they start working in the US? And when can the spouse of an H1B work visa apply for the H4 visa?
So the spouse of the H-1B visa person can apply for the H-4 just as long as they're married. So as soon as the person gets the H-1B, the spouse gets the H-4, so long as there's a marriage certificate, a valid marriage certificate. As far as the work permit for the H-4 spouse can only work when the H-1B visa holder secures an immigrant petition approval, meaning approval of the I-140. So that means that not only does that employer have to sponsor and win the H-1B, but then that employer has to sponsor the I-140, meaning some sort of green card process, whether that's EB-1 or through the labor market test.
Thank you. Um, can a Canadian PR, not a citizen from Canada, work in the US?
Yes, but they can't get the TN. For a TN work permit in the US, you have to be a Canadian citizen.
And then I think this one, next, how many times can you renew a TN? I think you had answered that previously. It's almost unlimited. Yeah.
Indefinitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And then next one, the same thing for Santosh. If you're a PR, you're not eligible for Canadian citizen. Any tax implications if I live in Canada on PR and work in the US? I can take that one. That's what we do. So Syndesis, when we employ you in Canada, we're your employer of record. You are legally employed in Canada as an employee, not as a contractor. And also you are living in Canada, not living in the US. Therefore, you are not, since what most people were dealing with is they left the US because of an immigration challenge, they're not going back unless 4 or 5 years from now they get their citizenship in Canada and they bounce back down a TN. So we're telling people is it's a one-way street. You're in Canada, your US door is closed. Immigration options have closed off. If you lost H1B lottery third time, OPT expired, US IRS is not concerned with you anymore. You are no longer in the US. So what happens is, Syndesis is the Canadian employer of record. We employ you in Canada. You're employed as an employee. We collect and remit all taxes to the Canadian government, this Canada Revenue Agency. It's our version of the IRS. Your taxes are paid in Canada. You are a Canadian tax resident. The US doesn't matter. So in this case, this is what we do. Your employer's in the US, you're working in Canada, you're subject to Canadian laws. Your US employer likes using us because they're like, we pay Syndesis and they handle everything taxation in Canada. US companies like, no problems for us, no tax implications, no nothing. For you, it's easy because you're like, I'm paying taxes in Canada, I'm a tax resident of Canada. There's no cross-border tax issues. That answers that one. And then last, let's see if we got any. If I'm employed in the US, in Canada, but if I'm employed in the US on H1B, but live in Canada on PR, I think, Laura, that would be the situation. We would say you didn't get the H1B, or what's also possible is we've had people say, I've got the H1B, but the green card wait was too long. I'm leaving. I'm going to Canada. I'm going to go try and get that Canadian PR in 12 to 24 months and citizenship in 4. So the only issue there is that, Laura, I think I'll defer this one to you, is if someone says, yeah, I've got an H1B, I'm leaving, I go to Canada, I'm not going to be back in the US. I'm going to take care of take advantage of their immigration, but Syndesis will help me work remotely for my US company. I think what we've heard people say is, so my H1B then eventually goes away if I'm not living in the US for years. I think that's the
No,
case.
you can pick it up again, assuming you have an I-140 approval notice from a prior employer that was approved and wasn't revoked, or you didn't use all 6 years of your H-1B. Once you are subject to the lottery and you fit one of those conditions, you can sort of restart your H-1B if you wanted to come back in. Um, that is not a common thing I see because, again, most people are exiting because they had so many other challenges. But I guess in theory, it is very possible you come back in under the H-1B. Again, if you fit the criteria of you've not used 6 years holding H-1B status for a cap subject lottery petition, or you have an I-140 approval, you can come back at any time in that H-1B with a sponsored employer.
Great. I think we're at time now.
Awesome.
That,
Great questions.
yeah, lots of good questions. We'll be doing these webinars again. Anything, if you're looking at those US options and you're like, okay, I didn't realize all these exist. Laura has her email right there. We'll send our contact information out. If you're like, I'm out of US options, what's the Canada option? Reach out to Cindy's team at Connect. Again, we'll send a recording out of this. Thanks for all the good questions. And Laura, thanks for your expert advice. Super appreciated.
Thanks for having
And
me.
again, thanks everyone.
Bye, everybody.